Hello and welcome to a very special interview here on Viking.TV with me, Anne Diamond, because I'm going to introduce you now to somebody who needs no introduction. But to give you a hint, let's have a look at this.
It's hard to accept that it's time to go. Your friendship has never been more important to all of us. But the future of Downton Abbey is now in Mary's hands.
You will be a sensation.
Lady Mary must go now. She's divorced.
I'm very sorry. I shouldn't have come.
This really is the night that shook the world.
That is what's happened. Now we must just get on with it.
What about her running Downton? Don't you want her in command?
The world is changing. The way we talk, the way we dress, the way we deal with each other.
Surely you're entitled to have some fun.
Classic Mary.
Welcome back, my brother.
Cora.
The news is bad, isn't it?
How could you tell?
I've known you since you were born.
Hal's made a real mess of things, hasn't he?
Don't you see what this means for Downton? You look back and think about all the changes you've witnessed.
You're the daughter I never had.
I'll treasure those words.
Families like ours must keep moving to survive. And all of your support is more important to me than I can say.
If Mama were alive, what would she do?
Long live Downton Abbey.
Amen to that.
It's funny because to introduce somebody who needs no introduction and to read his book, you'll realise quite what a long time and an awful lot of effort goes into becoming somebody who needs no introduction. Here's Hugh Bonneville. It's lovely to see you.
I'm very flattered by that introduction that needed no introduction.
Well, isn't it true that it seems to be a theme that goes throughout the book, that, you know, to be sitting here talking about your amazing career, it doesn't always come easy, does it?
It doesn't, and I think hindsight is a wonderful tool that we all possess. You know, you can look back and join all the dots and see a logical progression to today, to why we're sitting here. But actually, at the time, we don't know if we're turning left or right. We don't know what's going to happen after lunch. And so it's all a whole load of accidents, as well as, yes, hopefully hard work and endeavour, but really so much good fortune along the way, and just a passion for what one's doing as well. But of course, there are some thoughts, you know, you go back and, did I actually think that, or is it because I remember a photograph of that incident? There's a passage in here when I talk about when I was on tour with a play when I was at Cambridge and we were in Germany. And I showed the chapter to a pal of mine in that show just to check that it happened. I said, you know, this did happen, didn't it? And so I published it, and I said, Dominic and I had digs in this place. And then another man who was in that production of Romeo and Juliet got in touch and said, I was in those digs too. There were 5 of us, don't you remember? And I'd only remembered the incident of talking to this particular American colonel who hosted us. And so the memory does play tricks. So that's why I'm very keen to call it a memoir, not an autobiography, because I think autobiography smacks of accuracy. And memoir allows the memory to play tricks on you. And you can airbrush out the stuff that perhaps you want to forget, and as I say, some things are more vivid than others, and that's just memory playing tricks. But I'm glad it comes across as my voice anyway.
Yeah, it certainly comes across as your voice, so much so that halfway through the book I thought, I wonder wonder if he's recorded the audiobook, and you have, and I got that too.
Oh, good.
I've had a mixture of the two things.
Oh, that's
actually,
great.
Which has been
well,
brilliant.
you see, of course, in the printed version you get photographs, which you don't get in the audio, but in the audio you get 2 or 3 more chapters. So.
Oh, I didn't realise that.
Yes, well worth a listen.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, it's. I'm going to do what you did in the book actually, and start with Downton Abbey because that's, we've just seen that's why so many people all over the world now know your face so well. And you start in this lovely world that most of us non-actors never see. We imagine that when you've got as important as filming something like Downton Abbey, which has been acclaimed for so long, that you would be treated like superstars when you walk in for a rehearsal. And you start with a scene that's really not superstarish at all.
Well, you mean the read-through?
Yeah.
Well, yes. I remember I wrote about the read-through for the first film, the first feature film that we did, which was a few years after we'd finished the show, and you do tend to meet in these rather unsalubrious circumstances because there's so many of you. It has to be either be in a sort of deconsecrated church or in British film studios are fairly run down on the whole, and Ealing Studios or Shepperton, I can't remember which one it was, but they've got sort of chicken wire on the walls with what looks like asbestos billowing out, and they haven't been touched since Alec Guinness was there in the 1950s or whatever. And you're sitting around a big sort of semicircle of a trestle table, and there might be a satsuma or a manky orange. Or if you're lucky, there might be, depending on the class of production, certain degrees of coffee. You might have instant coffee if it's a theatre production, or you might get a sort of high street chain coffee if it's TV. But then if it's a film, you might even have an in-house barista. You see, it all depends.
Wow.
But I do remember gathering for the Downton Abbey read-through. And we'd been told a few days earlier that the marketing team had come up with this really funky idea of filming us while we were doing the read-through. Now, read-throughs are the most painful experience, particularly for the writers, but also for the actors, because it's the first time you're hearing it all together. And no one, you might not know each other, so 1 or 2 people might know each other. So it's a very delicate thing, and it's quite a private thing. It's a bit like being in the makeup trailer. That's also meant to be a sacrosanct area as well, where it's just a bit of privacy. And so I think it probably was Maggie Smith who, when she heard this plan of filming us, sort of said, "Oh, I don't think so." And so it was soon shut
You do
down.
that very well. Go on.
So, no, it's simply that the read-through was, again, one of these cold, windy experiences, but without the cameras, thank goodness. And I do remember after, we started reading, and after just a few lines, just looking around the table at all my friends that we'd been part of the show for on and off for 10 years by then, or certainly 8-10 years. And just, we sort of almost had a nod of the, shake of the head that we couldn't quite believe that we were here again, in a good way. And that, this show that no one had thought, certainly in the British broadcasting industry, really thought had any legs or would survive past the first season. And here we are 6 seasons later, and now we're doing a movie. So it was a very special moment. And I have to say, just on that, when we went back to do the second movie, of course, the read-through by then was on Zoom because we were in the lockdowns.
Of course. In
the pandemic. And I have to say, when we went back to filming the second movie at Highclere, particularly at the castle, I'd always, going up that driveway every day to set was always a sort of hairs on the back of the neck. I couldn't believe this was my, my office. But not that we'd ever taken it for granted, but we got used to it, and we got used to the scenery and the location and all that. But I have to say, during the second film, knowing that the script was really a tonic for people emerging from lockdown, it had that sort of carefree spirit about it, and I just knew that our audience would really love it. And I really appreciated it in a way that I hadn't before, coming onto set every day and realizing how fortunate we were and how lucky we were to work as actors during the pandemic, at the latter stages of 2021 or middle of 2021. And I really appreciated Downton Abbey in a way I'd never had before, because I realized, the hundreds of messages we've had over the years of what it's meant to families, to people who maybe they were watching it with loved ones who are no longer with us and that sort of thing. It really did make an impact on people, and still now, all these years later, people are still watching it for the first time and going, "Oh, it's really good."
It's quite good. This.
So those two, experiences of the read through of the first film and then the pandemic version of it, or the second film, I realised more than ever what a lucky fellow I am and how lucky we all were to do something that's become so beloved.
It's funny because when you first heard the words, I don't know if it was called Downton Abbey from the very beginning, but you bumped into Julian Fellows and just sort of more or less in small talk asked him what he was up to at the moment. And he said something about writing a period piece or something. And didn't he ask you if you would be okay being thought of as a patriarchal figure, old enough to have 3 marriageable age girls?
That's right. We were doing, in fact, he was directing me in a film called From Time to Time, which is a delightful film with Maggie Smith playing the lead. And in fact, as it turned out, about half the cast, you can spot the Downton actor in it. This was a year prior to doing Downton. And yes, in between setups one day, I asked him, what else have you got in the works? Because, being a writer as well as a director, he always has plates spinning. And he said, I'm doing a 4-part series about the Titanic, and I'm adapting the book. And also, actually, I'm revisiting Gosford Park territory. I'm writing a show about a country house and between the wars. And he said, yes, do you think you're too old to play a dad? And I said, well, I am a dad. He said, yes, but your Felix is only about 5. Marriageable age daughters. And I said, I don't know, possibly, I don't know. And it went from there. But it's interesting, he talked about the country house between the wars as one of the few precincts, as they say in drama, one of the few settings where you can legitimately see a true cross-section of society, which is why so many shows are set in hospitals or in police stations. I suppose you could set them in airports, but airports are far more transitory. But it's true, you can see all walks of life in those environments. So there's a static centre, be it the police station or the hospital, or in this case the country house, which becomes the central character. And then in and out of that come people from all walks of life. And I think that again was one of the great strengths of the show, that you could invest in all these different types of people from their different backgrounds and different aspirations, but all trying to muddle along in this one place.
Yeah, somewhere I think towards the end of the book you concede that there are, who are the biggest stars from Downton? Or what is the biggest star from Downton?
Well, the biggest star is the house, is the castle. And then I think Maggie Smith a close run second.
Absolutely.
But bless her, she was there at the beginning of every read-through and saw it through to the end.
You tell a lovely story about when she was there and then Shirley MacLaine came on set for the first time.
Oh, that was, yes, I describe it as like Stanley meeting Livingston, these two great icons, coming together, one from the British, icon of the British industry and one of the American, and they met in the hallway at Highclere. I can remember it vividly. It was about 8 o'clock in the morning, just before rehearsal started, and it was cold, so they had on these big puffer coats, and they met right in front of the fireplace. It was a perfect 2-shot. I was on the stairs watching, and they gave each other a hug, and Maggie said, have we met before? I can't remember. And Shirley said, oh, don't you remember? I can't do American accent very well. Don't you remember it was at the Oscars? It was 40 years ago. And she said, I was probably face down in a cake. We were backstage, so we must have been presenting. Oh, we didn't win then, and they just sort of, rattled on together for ages, and could have gone either way. They got two great characters, two great divas, in the proper sense of the word, great icons, but they got on like a house on fire. And one of my fondest memories actually is of, and Shirley was great with the youngsters, and Michelle Dockery, who played Lady Mary, she was a really keen and wonderful dancer herself, and of course Shirley had done these Broadway shows, and so I always remember Shirley showing Michelle and Tom Cullen, who was in the show, some Bob Fosse moves, and saying, no, you got to go from the hip, kick from the hip, it's got to go from the hip, doing all, and it was just glorious, this sense of the baton being passed on down the generations.
Of course, we all, non-actors, have always understood there's an awful lot of hanging around in filming. What do amazing women from the industry, like Dames and Shirley MacLaine, Hollywood actress, what do they have in their handbag? What do they get out the knitting in between times, or what?
Well, Judi Dench certainly has done in the past. I used to do tapestry, and Julia Roberts did. So she and I compared tatting on Notting Hill. But on Downton, the big theme was word games, and not Scrabble so much as a game called Bananagrams, which is a bit like Scrabble. They got to, Bananagrams people got to hear that we used to play Bananagrams, which is a sort of, again, you sort of put tiles down and create words and they have to link up and all that sort of thing. And they heard about this, so they gave us a specially produced Downton edition of Bananagrams, which was lovely. So there's a bit of that, and we'd play Wink Murder when we were on the set, when it was too tricky to get off the set while they were...
Wink Murder?
Wink Murder, which is you'd put... It's daft. You just tear up bits of paper, but on one of them, say there's 8 people around a table, so you tear up 8 bits of paper, and on one of them you put a cross, so that's the murderer. And we used to put them in the mustard pot, and then while they were setting up the lights, we'd hand it round, and so you'd all take one, and then you'd carry on chatting, and then what you'd have to do, your task was, without anybody else seeing, you'd have to wink at someone, and then they had to die. You see, can you die elaborately, please? Just, you see, and so somebody thinks, right, so so who's the murderer? Who's the murderer? So then you're paranoid. Who's next? And so you're watching everybody, and then gradually round the table people die until you go, j'accuse, I think it's you. I think you're the murderer, or you saw them wink or something like that. Maggie was really good at it. It was really annoying.
That is why you lot gave her, on her final shoot day, you gave her the mustard pot.
Yes, Elizabeth McGovern got her little silver mustard pot. It was a memento, because that was
Perfect.
we played so many games of Wink Murder.
I want to do what you do in the book now, which is flash right back, because you write so vividly about some of these things. I want to bring you back to the letter, the turning point. You talk about it, and you still look back and wonder what your life would have panned out to be had you not got the letter.
Yeah.
Tell us what the letter was.
Well, I auditioned when I was 16 for the National Youth Theatre. The letter was saying, you've got in. And I can remember, again, it's these moments in life where you look. I can remember the moment I opened the letter. I could see the postmark and this familiar headed notepaper saying your application's been successful. And I wonder if it and I've bumped into people since who've said that their letter said unsuccessful. Mm-hmm. Again, it's these left and right turns you have in life. If I'd not had that experience, would I have had the confidence to carry on in exploring theatre? It was just wonderful to be with kids who wanted to put on plays non-stop and full stop. But also, it was my first real social broadening in terms of I started meeting kids from all walks of life, and realised again how fortunate I'd been with this backdrop of comfortable middle-class life in southeast London, being exposed to the arts, whereas so many of my colleagues now had none. They literally, some didn't even have a book in the house. And I think that's where it sort of sunk into me, what a responsibility I had, and I have now, to support young people in the arts.
You say when you went to the National Youth Theatre that first time, you felt you'd found your tribe. Mm. When you got to the RSC and the National, you felt home.
I did really, yes. The tribe was finding my like-minded, fellow actors, and then really going to, I suppose, the National first, the National Theatre in London on the South Bank, which has 3 theatres, and I was only playing, I didn't even have any lines. I was just an understudy, so in effect, I was sort of watching from the sides. But I learned so much there. Because of the 3 theatres, I was able to pop into the wings of the other theatres in my acres of time.
You've got a lovely passage in the book. Can I ask you to read it?
Yeah.
Which it's when you're at the National, and you just get a flavour of, and you impart that flavour of how exciting it must have been just hovering in the wings.
Oh, yeah. So you have a backstage, of course, you have a tannoy system that announces what's the 3 different theatres, and they had staggered start times. So you had the Olivier Theatre always started at 7:15, the Cottesloe at 7:30, and then the Littleton at 7:45. Each evening, 3 companies of actors preparing for shows in 3 different theatres with 3 different audiences. I was in a great big dressing up box, and even though I barely featured in the stories being told, I loved being part of it all. At 6:40 p.m, the first of the evening's tannoy announcements will be broadcast backstage. Olivier Theatre, good evening, ladies and gentlemen of the King Lear, or Small Family Business, or Anthony and Cleopatra Company. This is your half-hour call. Half an hour, please, thank you. Followed 15 minutes later by Cottesloe Theatre, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And then at 7:10 p.m, Littleton Theatre, good evening. With each theatre's quarter, 5, and beginners' calls singing out as the clock counted down, the sense of mounting anticipation was palpable. 3 ships preparing to leave harbour. 7:15 p.m, the hushed tones of the DSM, the Deputy Stage Manager. Olivier Theatre, lights up on Act 1. 7:30 p.m, Cottesloe Theatre, lights up. 7:45 p.m, Littleton Theatre. And off they'd sail on a cruise to distant lands of the imagination. Docking a few hours later, the passengers would disembark and the crews would gather in the backstage bar to swap stories of that particular voyage's adventures and mishaps. So it's very appropriate for a cruise channel.
It is actually, isn't it? I hadn't thought of it. But that sounds so exciting. To a young man sort of trying to make it in the business, it must have been absolutely exciting.
It was. I was just a little minnow in this big pond, and of actors I respected and continue to respect. People like, when I was there holding my little spear, there was Anthony Hopkins and Judi Dench and Michael Gambon and a wonderful company of actors who came and went, and I just learned really by osmosis, started to learn my craft.
And of course, you mentioned Kenneth Branagh. He became a great mate, didn't he?
Well, he became certainly a great mentor. Yes, and I only realised this actually when I was writing the book, that he became a sort of fulcrum in the transition between my doing theatre and film. I never thought I'd do film, and in fact, when I was doing the Hamlet with him, because we used to do our fight rehearsals every day, we'd have a bit of a catch-up about what was going on. And he was in pre-production for Frankenstein at the time. And he also commissioned me to write a screenplay. It didn't actually come to anything in the end, but he was incredibly instrumental in giving me the confidence to write. And he said, "Have you been in any movies?" And I said, "No, never." And he said, "Well, look, why don't you come and be in Frankenstein? I've got this, tiny little part, but at least you'll get to see what a film set's like, and you'll get to learn about it and learn what works in terms of writing and so on." So he was really remarkably generous to me, and so that was his Frankenstein. My one line in Frankenstein was my first film.
So it went on. I mean, and then Downton Abbey's happened, and you mentioned during the filming of Downton Abbey, they did release you to do quite a few films as well, which we've subsequently come to know you so well by. For instance, I think when you were in Downton Abbey, they did release you to do Monuments Men.
That was an extraordinary story and a great bit of good fortune again. It so happened that my American agent was also Julian Fellowes' agent, and Julian Fellowes being the writer-creator of Downton Abbey. And he said, and Julian heard about this, and he heard it was in the cast, and it was George Clooney and Bob Balaban was one of the members of the cast. And Bob Balaban had given Julian the break because he co-produced Gosford Park, and it was Gosford Park that got Julian Fellowes the Oscar, which sort of released the rest of his writing career, if you like, and certainly was the seed for Downton Abbey. So Julian said, I want to make this work. I know how important these breaks can be, and I'm incredibly grateful to Bob and the serendipity of it all. And so he very kindly, basically, I think it's in season 4 or 5, he wrote me out. I go off to America to do some to solve some family problem and come back at the end of the next episode, in order that there was a 3-week chunk they needed me on Monuments Men particularly. So I'm immensely grateful to Julian for that. And funnily enough, on the set of Monuments Men, I was talking to George about this. And
George Clooney?
George Clooney, sorry, George Clooney. Lest we forget. Yes. And he said that when he was doing ER, he made something like 30 films, because his character was always popping back to Chicago or wherever, or down south to see a relative.
So he understood.
So he completely got it. And in fact, I've always found along the way, particularly obviously in the filming world, that producers are incredibly generous at trying to make things fit. Things because their whole life is problem solving and solving logistics, and so I was immensely grateful to them. But there was a show I was doing called 2012, which was all about, it was a comedy set against the Olympics. And that literally was dovetailing with both projects. So one was based at the Olympic Park or near the Olympic Park in the East End of London, and one was obviously at Highclere Castle. So I was literally zipping up and down the motorway every other day. It kept me on my toes anyway.
I'll bet, yeah. There's so much in your book. I could ask you many more questions, but frankly, people ought to go and buy the book really, if they want to hear any more stories. But how do you relax at all away from the business? I know you work a lot with the South Downs National Trust. Is that a particular passion?
Well, it is. Well, just frankly, the open air and being. I live down in the towards the south coast of England, and near the South Downs, which are in West Sussex, which is God's own county, and but there is something about being up on the open expanse of the hills and being able to look out across a sort of carpet of green and down towards the sea on the other side, and to hike along there. There's a wonderful walk called the South Downs Way, which is 100 miles from Winchester to Eastbourne. And I did that, not in one sitting, but I did it over several days with some pals. And there's nothing like, going for a hike with mates and one's dogs and just, chewing the fat.
Oh, I've got to ask you about dogs. Downton Abbey, of course, famous for its dogs. Wasn't always the same dog, though, was it?
No. Well, after the first season, we had this slightly lumpy dog called Rolly, playing Pharaoh, the dog, who really, like actors, only worked for food. And the only reason that, he walks obediently down my side in the first scene when Lord Grantham comes down the staircase is I got chipolatas in my hand. And
is that true?
It's absolutely true, yeah. And every suit I had bits of chipolata somewhere when there was a dog.
So the dog would faithfully follow you.
Yeah. That's the only thing he was interested in. And so it came to the beginning of season 2, and this I was about to go on set, and Julian Fellows. I was chatting to Julian Fellows, who happened to be there that day, and this, the runner came along with the dog, and he said, "Here's Pharaoh, and they're ready for you on set." And I looked at the dog, and this thing was going with its tail wagging like that, and going. I said, "This isn't the same dog. This isn't Pharaoh. It's called Pharaoh." I said, "It can't be called Pharaoh. This is half the size, and it's keen, and it's wagging, and it's, and." He said, "No, it is. They're ready on set. Can you just get on set?" I said, "Also, this one's a bitch." And oh, is it? I said, "Yes, I think people will notice." And so we then, on the spot, had to come up with a new name because I referred to it in the scene, and so that's where. We came up with the name Isis, which of course was, as anyone who knows Egyptology will know, that Isis and Osiris were two great god and goddess. And of course Isis then in later years took on a horrible new meaning. Yeah. But we did have several Isises over the years, and then latterly a Thea. You
also organised a premiere of Downton on the International Space Station, didn't you? What was that about?
That was amazing. There was someone you and I know, Carol Vorderman, is very much into her space exploration and aeronautics and so on. And she'd asked me years ago, would I do a message for someone who worked at NASA? And it came to several years later, which I did. And then several years later, I wanted to visit NASA as part of a road trip my family and I were doing. And so I got in touch with Carol and I said, "Do you think your friend who's there would show me around a bit?" And so sure enough, that happened. And we got a sort of backstage pass, if you like, and got to be by the vast swimming pool where the International Space Station model is. So they train in the water of this vast tank about what they will do up in space. And one chap who was getting into his, it took about two hours plus to get into the spacesuit to be, everything wired up and all that. And so we were chatting on the side of the big swimming pool, and he was called Bob Farmer Hines. Cut to again a couple of years later, and we'd stayed in touch a little bit, and he said, "I'm actually going up on the next crew to the ISS." And I said, "Oh, good luck." And he said, "I'm sorry, I see you've got your film coming out soon, so I'll miss that, but I'm really sorry, maybe I'll see it when I get back." Anyway, the next thing I know, he texts me from space, and he's saying, "Hey, it's a great view up here."
He texted you from space?
Yeah, he sent me a message from space saying, "Yeah, we're over South America at the moment. It looks so cool." And I was going, "I can't believe this. This is amazing." And he said, "How's the film going?" And so I thought, well, hang on, maybe we could do something. It was about to be the premiere in America. And so we made various phone calls up the food chain, and they got the film beamed up to the ISS.
That's quite something.
And so it was great to think that we had a premiere in space, or a screening.
You've been all over, haven't you? When I said you're globally famous, it's even more than that, isn't it?
Fame.
Yeah. Right, we have some questions from our viewers. From Susan in Bournemouth. Did you enjoy Hollywood? Because I don't think you did terribly, did you?
I love visiting Hollywood. I've been very fortunate to visit both for work and some friends have living there. But I went to do a show that didn't go very successfully, and in fact I do write about that in the book.
You do.
I made great friends on that show. Don't get me wrong, but the system, the way that the cruelty and the hard-nosedness of Hollywood, I didn't relish hugely. I don't think I could live there permanently. No.
It's interesting you say that, because from Peter and Linda Martin in Oslo, "Thanks for all your work. We are Paddington fans, but watching years of Downton has made us feel a sense of home since we live out here in Norway now. Would you live anywhere other than Britain?"
I think I probably would. And having said I wouldn't live in Hollywood, there are certain parts of America I love. I love the northeast coast. I think as a kid, I'm probably being influenced by my visits to New Hampshire there. But I've always dreamt of France and somewhere in Central Europe perhaps. But I think at the moment, soggy West Sussex in England with the South Downs nearby, that'll do.
Well, it sounds like work is too busy at the moment anyway. Another quick one on Downton. What was it like having Maggie Smith as a mother?
So it was really wonderful, because when you're on set, you know, you either got wigs or makeup and costume pulling at you, or you're only there for half the time she is, or whatever. But having her as the mother figure in that show was remarkable. I mean, everybody was on, you know, wanting to bring the best game to the table.
And in her death scene, there was a gesture from her that you didn't expect.
I know, it was, I realised as in the death scene, spoiler alert, she dies in number 2, sitting by the bed there, and we were just beginning to do the day's filming, and she did something she'd never done before. She reached out and she touched my hand, and she just gave it a little squeeze, and in all the 12 years, I don't think we'd ever touched. It was really strange, and she touched me and she gave me a little squeeze, and after that, you know, no acting required.
No. Well, look, I could go on all day asking you more questions, but the basic lesson, I think, from speaking to you just now is if anyone wants to hear any more, they should actually get the book or the audiobook, which is absolutely brilliant as well. And as you say, has 2 extra chapters.
Yeah.
Playing under the piano is basically just because that's where you used to play when you were a little boy.
Sort of, yeah. Yes, I've just got a very strong image of memory of being at my nursery school, being under the piano in the upright piano in the corner of the classroom, and not being sure if I should come out into the spotlight where the teacher wanted me to do something, and I was happier under the piano with my toys. And so that's tension of being, actually, I mean, I'm not a hugely extrovert person, and actually finding that the playing with the toys under the piano is where you're meant to do it, and not out in the spotlight. That's for, you know, don't show off, that's showing off.
Well, we're all glad you did come out from under the piano. It's been absolutely riveting, as is the book, as is the audiobook. I've had such fun listening to it.
Thank you.